Hey, Vic, I got a little known fact for you.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. Did you know that I like to shoot skeet?
I did not know that.
Yeah. I'm really bad at it,
Uh-huh.
but I think it's pretty awesome. I probably could use a little practice.
Yeah, I did it once. When I was a battalion XO, my CO was huge into it. And so he would take us clay shooting, and I fell in love with it. I only done it once. It was only that one time, but it was so fun.
Man.
So fun.
Okay, so I have a great idea.
Wait, hold on really quick. How's
Okay.
your calendar space look, though? Like, are you pretty full for the next couple months?
Not too full.
How about November?
No, I got some openings in November.
21st, right before Thanksgiving? Are
I
you
think
wide
November
open?
21st, I'm wide open. Why? What do you got? Something to
Well,
suggest?
I heard that just through a little bird told me that the Marine Corps Association is actually hosting a sporting clay shoot for the Marines on the 21st. So I'd mark your calendar if you've got it.
That's awesome. So do you have to be a beginner, or can you be a beginner? You have to be an experienced shooter?
From what I've been told, whether you're a seasoned shooter or a beginner, it's a great way to spend the day outdoors, connect with others, support a cause that makes a difference for Marines. That's huge, right? We're big into supporting causes that help benefit Marines.
I think that's great. And so what are they going to do with the proceeds for this? Is this for charity or?
It actually, it'll stay in house, which is a form of charity. I mean, we are a 501(c)(3).
Yes, we are.
And it won't it's gonna line my pockets. Like Vic Rubel's not going to the bank with this thing, but it will help support professional development programs that help Marines succeed in their careers and beyond, not just in their careers. Beyond their careers.
That's really cool.
It's huge, right?
Can you go as an individual? Do you need to have a team? Do you know how that works?
The way I understand it is there are team spots, there are sponsorship opportunities available, but they will fill up fast. If you are an individual, I just go to McClays. That's MCACLAYS. .givesmart.com, register, and
that's where you're going to find all the details.
You get the info there. Go ahead and register, sign up. I'm sure it's like golf. If they need a foursome, they'll add you to the team.
Ooh, that sounds really cool.
I think it's very cool. I love clay shooting. It was a lot of fun. I think this is a great way to give back and to have a great time, like I said, outdoors.
Yeah, it's a great way to spend the day outdoors.
Pull the trigger.
Break some clays and get a little time away from the desk. I like it. I'm going to look into that.
Awesome. Let's go.
Hey, Scuttlebutt listeners. Welcome to episode 216. This week, as we recognize the 42nd anniversary of the Beirut bombings, we welcome Rabbi Arnold Resnicoff to the show. I'm not really sure where to begin introducing Rabbi Resnicoff because his accomplishments are so extensive. He didn't begin his career behind the pulpit, but on the front lines. Rabbi Resnicoff served in Vietnam as a naval officer on a small craft patrolling the rivers to deny enemy movement. He went to rabbinical school after his time in Vietnam and served 25 years as a Navy chaplain. Rabbi Resnicoff was instrumental in the creation of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial in Washington, D.C., and he was one of the 3 chaplains on site at the Marine Barracks in Beirut on that fateful day. Rabbi Resnicoff recounts his service in Vietnam, the challenges of attending rabbinical school after having served in the war, and his experiences on the ground in Beirut on October 23, 1983. This is a very special episode, and we are so excited to share it with you. This is episode 216.
Hey, Scuttlebutt listeners. Thank you for joining us and your continued support. I'm Vic. I'm here with Nancy.
Hi, Vic. How are you?
I'm doing very well, thank you. I'm a little bit jealous of you. I'll just be right out front as we're starting. You're heading out to California, God's country, here soon, and I'm seething. It's just coming out of my pores.
Wow.
Jealousy.
Wow. That's really assertive. I've never, expressed that same kind of sentiment when you take a vacation. Yeah, I am going to Southern California, leaving over the weekend. My bags are almost packed, and I'm looking forward to a little bit of downtime and some sunshine.
And family time, right? You're going
family
out?
time, yes,
Yeah.
family time. Going to the wedding of a friend. I'll be spending some time with my brother and with my daughter and my son-in-law, and it's all good stuff.
Yeah, is he still in La Jolla, San Diego area?
Yes,
Okay.
he is. Yeah, yeah.
Have you talked to Sarah at all? You gonna try to link up with her?
Oh yes, I am. In fact, we were in touch yesterday. We will be getting together and probably doing our favorite thing, which is eating.
Nice. Yeah, then we're speaking of the illustrious Sarah Bach, who used to
Correct.
be a staff writer for Leatherneck
Yeah,
magazine, who's doing wonderful things out in God's country for University of California, San Diego.
he is. Yes, he is. I'm looking forward to seeing that. And I gotta say, I can't wait to see the ocean.
Ugh, don't
I
even
miss
get me
living near the
started.
beach.
See, this is the thing. This is what there's a certain zen or chi rejuvenation or something about just the salt water, but it doesn't happen quite so much for me in the Atlantic as much as it does the Pacific. There's just something in the DNA that I just find that is my Mount Zion, if you will.
That's quite a that's bold. That's bold.
It's there. It's
That's
just
bold.
there.
And that's a great segue for us to introduce. I mean, that was really well done.
That's what I do.
Wonderful
That's what I
segue
do. That's what
to
I do.
introduce our guest. I'm almost a little bit. I'm very excited to have this guest on, and yeah, I'll let you make the introductions, Vic.
Yeah, no, I equally am as excited. We've had some really amazing guests on the show, and we've all been so blessed to hear the stories of the people that have been willing to, take the time to lower themselves to come onto our show. This one is one of those just truly is honorable and admirable people that you just are so lucky to come into contact with, and that is Rabbi Arnold Resnicoff. Sir, so thank you so much for being here.
My honor. Thank you for inviting me.
For those who may not be aware, Rabbi Resnicoff just has. We would spend most of our show going through your CV, sir, but in short, you were a enlisted sailor in Vietnam, went ROTC, was a line officer, then went to rabbinical school, came back as a chaplain. You were in Beirut at the time of the Marine bombing, and then went on to hold almost every top position within the chaplain corps and within the religious ministry, serving in unbelievable capacities. Ronald Reagan used your speech. I thank you so much for being here, and just thank you for all of your service and everything you've done for America. I mean, I just can't tell you how just honored I am to have you on the show.
Well, your words make me proud. They make me blush a little too. I do want to make one tiny correction. When I was in Vietnam, I was already just after ROTC, so I was an officer in Vietnam, no longer enlisted. But I'm very proud to be here. And matter of fact, you're interviewing me as a birthday present for me. Tomorrow's my birthday.
Oh.
So, it's funny. There's a meme on the internet that says, it's so strange being the same age as old people. So tomorrow I'll be 79. I don't think of myself as old, but
wow.
That's
Happy
a big
birthday.
number. Thank
Happy
you.
birthday, truly.
Thank you.
Well, this is great. So on that note, so could you tell us a little bit about how you came to be in the uniform and what led you into the Navy as a young man?
Absolutely. It all started with my father. My grandfather was a rabbi in Russia. If you've seen Fiddler on the Roof, he was a rabbi in a little town exactly like the fictional Anatevka in Fiddler on the Roof.
Oh,
And
wow.
because of pogroms, because of danger, just like the people in Anatevka left their village. So my family came to America, and my father was 3 years old. And he told me that my grandfather never gave a sermon without first thanking God they made it to America, but secondly, thanking God there was an America that they could come to. And so my father was very patriotic. The day after Pearl Harbor, he quit his job and went to the recruiter. At that point, he was a lawyer, and the recruiter said, well, in 2 months, there'll be a JAG course. And he said, you don't understand. I've quit my job. Take me. And they said, well, we could take you as an enlisted man. He said, take me, take me. They sent him as a CB to the South Seas. And so when he stayed for the duration of the war. So he was always very clear to me, I was the oldest of 3 boys, that I should continue to repay our dues, or pay our dues to America by serving at least one assignment. So in high school, I joined the Naval Reserves. It was an interesting submarine unit in Anacostia in DC. They would take us down to Norfolk for a weekend. We'd go out and dive 15 times, and every time we'd stand at a different place in the submarine. But then when I went to college, I did transfer to Navy ROTC, NROTC. And then on graduation, I went straight to the rivers of Vietnam. And it was, I was on an LST, Hunterdon County, LST 838. And for those listeners who may not be familiar, these were 4 LSTs from World War II that were taken out of mothballs. The deck was reinforced to support helicopters. And inside, in World War II, these were the ships that would go right on the beach. The front door would open and tanks would roll out. So instead of tanks, they converted the inside to repair shops for the small boats, PBRs. In the river, the small boats made of fiberglass, jet propelled, needed 6 inches of water. Our ship needed 11 feet. So in the rainy season, we could go all the way up. And as you said, we went into Cambodia, the first commissioned vessel, May 12th, 1970, when President Nixon ordered us into Cambodia. But in the dry season, we would go as far as we could. And then we became the supply ship, the ammunition ship for the helicopters, for small boats, for the SEALs, and I remember our job, we were part of Operation Game Warden, which was an operation to keep the rivers free from Viet Cong infiltrators. And I remember, being on duty with a rifle, and if we saw a branch coming down the river, it was my job to shoot the branch because it could have been camouflage, for a swimmer, with an explosive device. So it was a hard year, but I learned so much about leadership that year. But the positive thing is, no one in the rivers had enough personnel to support their own chaplain. So there was one chaplain, an Episcopal priest, Les Westling, who was the circuit rider for the Mekong Delta. And, you never knew when he would arrive because he would hitch a ride on a helicopter, on a Vietnamese boat, on an American boat. So the first time he came on deck, we used to have personnel cards in addition to the personnel record. Back then it was files. Today, I'm sure everything is, digital. But he came up. Yeah, but he came up to me with this card in his hand, and he said, "You're Ensign Resnicoff?" I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "You're Jewish?" Looking at the card, I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "You just volunteered to be the Jewish lay leader." So I said, "Yes, sir." And I always tell people I learned a lot from him, starting with what it meant to be a real chaplain. He was deeply committed to his Christian faith, but he had so much faith that it would overflow and allow that faith to touch others of all religions and help them in their spiritual struggle, including me. So that was what I learned from him. But I joke and I say I also learned from him the military definition of volunteer, because every
Yeah.
time he saw me, I found I had volunteered for something else.
Yeah.
So he was the one that really planted the seed in my mind about being a rabbi. Matter of fact, I remember Yom Kippur. We just celebrated Yom Kippur, but back when I was in the rivers, he found a small island in the rivers, Antoy, and he got all the Jewish sailors and officers from the ships and boats in that area, and he asked me if I could lead a service, holding the JWB prayer book, the Jewish
Yes,
Welfare Board.
Welfare Board. Yeah,
That's
I'm
it.
well familiar with it. Yeah.
Well, so I was not raised with a strong Jewish Talmud, Gemara,
Yeah.
yeshiva, but I had studied for my bar mitzvah. I learned Hebrew when I spent a year working on a kibbutz in Israel, so I could make it through the service. And after that, that's when he really started asking me, did I ever consider being a rabbi? So it was really his push, a combination of Vietnam and this individual, Chaplain Wesley, that made me decide that I wanted to be a rabbi.
That's
That's
an
fascinating.
amazing story. Really
Yeah.
wonderful.
Yeah, it's so good. I had a similar situation at the time during OF1, during the invasion or leading up to it. I was the only, I was actually going to graduate school, but I was only really I wasn't the only Buddhist, but I was the only Buddhist with any sort of credential, just because I had been attending a Buddhist graduate school. And same sort of thing, the division chaplain said, hey, you're Buddhist, right? And, yeah, yes, sir. And like, hey, guess what? You're gonna do. Yeah, that was really fun. I ended up with a lot of recon guys, interestingly enough, who were attending my services. But yeah, very familiar with the volunteer voluntold dynamic of the military as well.
It's so important, and a lot of civilians don't realize how the chaplains work so hard to help people of all faiths. And one of the ways they do that is by appointing lay leaders for all the religions that they don't represent personally. So it just started out that my job was to make sure he was aware if a Jewish holy day was coming, what supplies he would need to order. But that beginning ended up being such a deep, abiding friendship that continued until the day he died.
I think it's so important too, because I mean, I think the old cliche, it's cliche for a reason, that there's no atheists in a foxhole, is that it just, I guess, speaks to the human experience and how the perception of the military being so rigid is still an extremely human organization, and that is, we are always looking out for our people and giving them opportunities, even within the structure of the military, to explore and to have avenues, even if they may not be devout in whichever, but allowing those things to occur, especially I think maybe because we are in the business of death, and so I think it really is a testament, I think, to the institution that and something that can be perceived as being so rigid is actually very flexible when it comes to what it means to live and die.
Yes, and there's a growing schism between the military world and the civilian world, as I'm sure both of you realize, that
Yes.
today so many people in the military are kind of legacy military personnel. They had either a parent or a close relative who served, and so many people I know who are civilians not only don't have any relatives in the military, but they hardly know anyone at all that's in the military. And that wasn't the same when I was growing up. I was born in 46, right after World War II, where everybody I knew, my teachers, my father, his friends, newspaper personnel, they were veterans, so they understood the military. I have friends today, when I say I was a chaplain in the military and they know I'm a rabbi, they think I only held services for Jewish personnel. And the idea that, it's interesting. In the chaplain school, we teach that a chaplain has three responsibilities. One, you minister to your own, which means I'll always be a rabbi to the Jews, like a Catholic priest will always be a priest to the Catholic personnel. But the second, is you facilitate ministry to those of other faiths. So I would never hold a Catholic service, but it's my responsibility, the more senior I got, to make sure that service was held, or a Muslim service, or a Buddhist service, that they had the supplies. And then finally, and this makes us different than most other countries, we care for all. And that includes the people who claim no religious faith. And, that's I would say that 90% of the people who came to me for counseling did not come with a religious question. They came to me because they knew that a chaplain had 100% confidentiality, that they could speak to me and use me as a sounding board without worry that anybody would know, what they were. So, I when we still had the don't ask, don't tell, I was the person that someone gay could tell he or she was gay. I remember I had someone tell me he was going to run away the next day, what the Army calls AWOL, and Navy says UA, unauthorized absence. And I remember the conversation we had. I said, if you do run away, take my phone number. Make sure you call me at any time. If you change your mind, you want to come back. But I said to him, if you run away, the FBI is not going to sick the dogs on you, but the day may come 10 years from now, 20 years from now, you'll have some minor traffic infraction. They'll run your name and find out you're a deserter, and your world will come crashing down. Isn't there some way we could talk? Tell me, what is it that's really bothering you? Is it your boss? Is it your workplace? And maybe we can work something out. So, people come to a chaplain for so many, and I'm very proud that we have a tradition in America where young men and women, when they put that uniform on, their parents tell them, remember, if you have a problem, see the chaplain.
Yeah, and I think that there is so much. I'm going to butcher the name on here, but there's so much to that. I mean, you really are walking the walk in that way, because I'm as looking at your website, and there's a picture of you frocking the Navy's first Muslim chaplain. Is it
Yes.
Manji?
Yes. He changed his name a couple of times, but Chaplain Noel, yes. And he absolutely right. I had the honor when he first came in, I was the senior chaplain at the submarine base at Groton, Connecticut, and the chief of chaplains at that point was Byron Holderby, sent him to me for 2 weeks so I could train him. And then, when the time came for him to, we say frocked, when you get promoted, but you don't get the paycheck yet.
Yeah. All the responsibilities and none of the pay.
Yeah, exactly, boy. And at this time of the shutdown, that has a strong ring for many people, unfortunately.
Yes, it does.
But so I was very, very happy that at that point I was the senior Jewish chaplain, and I was able to frock, the first Navy Muslim chaplain.
That's awesome. So good. I mean, there's just so many things like that in your career, and I can't wait to dive in. One quick sidebar question: did you ever have a chance? I saw looking through much of your career that you were, with NATO or in Europe. Did you ever get a chance to go back to Vietnam?
No, and I regret it. But as a matter of fact, my daughter and I are considering right now the possibility of a trip. I have a lot of friends, especially those involved with the creation of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial, and I know we'll talk about that. That's one of my proudest achievements, being part of that group of Vietnam vets who fought for that memorial. Many of them have been back. I'm divorced, and so I'm alone. I always envision going back with someone, the woman with whom I'm in love, that I could share all of the emotions that I'm sure would come bubbling back.
100%.
So,
yeah.
I know Jan Scruggs, who had the first vision for the Vietnam Veterans Memorial, has been back a number of times, made solid connections, with Vietnamese who actually fought against us, during the war. And they can't say enough about how warm the welcome was that they received and how important it is for us all to go back.
Yeah, I'm my mom is Vietnamese. She's one of the refugees that fled and got to the States in '75. And so I've been twice. And I will say between the time I went in 2001 and then the time I went again in 2017, it is an absolute, I mean, this is just a thriving metropolis. When you go to what is now Ho Chi Minh City, it's going to blow your mind. It is just such a just a thriving metropolis, and the it's such a beautiful country. I can't say enough. I think going with your daughter would be an absolutely wonderful experience. So if you do that, let's get you back on and we can talk that piece.
Absolutely. We'd love to
That'd be
really
amazing.
hear
And
that, what that is like.
even when I went, you could tell, even though the country was war torn, and such a different world back then. There was lush vegetation. It just was a beautiful country, and of course, it was called the Pearl of the Orient. And it's unfortunate some of the most beautiful cities are the ones that were the most war torn. I know Beirut was the Paris of the Levant, the Paris of the East. Vietnam, the Pearl of the Orient. So I do look forward, and I think telling my stories, to my daughter will be the right thing to do.
Yeah,
Oh, absolutely. Well,
so you
Rabbi,
go ahead, Nancy.
no, you go ahead, Vic.
I was going to say, Rabbi, you're a true professional, because that was a great step off into talking leading up to the Beirut story. But Nancy, did you have something first?
Absolutely, yeah. Before that, I just wanted to ask Rabbi, what was the response from your family when you came home from Vietnam and you had, you decided to become a rabbi and change the trajectory of your career? How did your parents and the rest of your family react to that?
It's funny because from Vietnam, I had one cousin who was a rabbi, and so I wrote to him first, and said that I'm thinking of studying to be a rabbi, and he says again and again to our relatives that he just chalked the letter up to shell shock. He said he thought to himself, "Well, that will pass," But of course, my father had tears in his eyes because there are certain memories he has. I grew up with a family, because they came from Russia. It was a very different family than the others on my street. I was born in D.C., but at 2 years old, we moved to Maryland, right over the line. And I remember the first time I went to elementary school and I saw kids shake hands with their fathers. I thought I was watching science fiction or something. I had never shaken hands with my father. It was always hugs and kisses, just, I think, more Russian or European. And so whenever he would talk about his father, tears would stroll down his eyes, and I flow on his face. And I inherited that. My daughter makes fun of me. I cry at not just movies and TV shows, but even commercials sometimes. So
I can relate to that.
Yeah. So my father cried. My mother was just, she was the kind of mother that anything that's good for you, is good for us. We're proud of you. She was not so invested emotionally, but at the end, they both were very, very proud.
That's awesome.
And, before we get to Beirut, do you want me to talk just a little bit about the Vietnam Veterans Memorial, since we talked about Vietnam?
100%, yeah.
Okay, so, today, as you both know, rightfully, it's one of the most beloved and most heavily visited memorials. And I don't think a lot of people remember, that nobody wanted it to be built.
I remember that controversy. I was a teenager then, and I remember hearing sorry for the interruption, but
No,
I
please.
really remember that controversy. And I remember not fully understanding why there was controversy about it. It took me a little bit of maturity to be able to understand the full story.
Yeah. And today, whenever someone learns I'm a veteran, they say, thank you for your service. And that sometimes I tell them, well, I don't tell them directly because I just thank them for saying that. But when I speak to audiences, groups, I say, please, please, please thank veterans for their service. But if you know that the person you're addressing is a Vietnam veteran, there's one thing better to say, and that's welcome home. Because when we got home, we were not welcomed and we were treated abysmally. Now, I was a little bit older. I had been an officer in Vietnam, but these younger guys, had gone through hell for a year in Vietnam, and then they came back to a different kind of war, a different kind of hell, where they were treated almost like war criminals. So Vietnam tore our country apart. And Jan Scruggs, he had been an enlisted man in the Army, and he just decided he wanted to change the way we were treated. And he had this vision of a memorial not to the war, but to the veterans. It's not the Vietnam War Memorial. Some people call it that, and I always correct them. It's the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. Yeah, and it's the first memorial linked to a war that I think uses that word veterans. Now there are others, the Korean Veterans Memorial, but we were the first. And the idea was that the memorial would make no statement about the war. There were some people that didn't want a memorial built unless it ended the criticism of the war and glorified, our participation. Other people didn't want it built unless it glorified the protesters and admitted the war was a mistake. So the compromise that we had a Vietnam Veterans Memorial that made no statement about the war. It was a place, no matter what you felt about the war, you could come to mourn the deaths. It's around 58,000 now, and by extension, respect those who survived. So what happened was those who hated the idea of the war took out that hatred on the veterans. And that was the memorial that changed the vision of America, I think, that we could separate how you felt about a war and how you felt about the war fighters. The operation we got involved with after Vietnam was Desert Shield, Desert Storm. And literally, people started putting yellow ribbons around trees based on that old country song, tie a yellow ribbon around the old oak tree, showing support, regardless of how they felt about our involvement, whether we should be over there, showing support for the men and women who were serving and who would come home. So just to give you a very quick story, because so many young people today don't remember how bad it was, we dedicated the Memorial Veterans Day weekend, 1982, and leading up to the actual dedication ceremony, and I was very proud, I gave the closing prayer for that ceremony. We invited veterans to tell their stories. Today, sometimes we still read the names, but we actually had veterans tell their stories. And people came from all over America. And there was just one story that kind of sums it up for me. A soldier who had lost his arm in Vietnam got out and went back to school, tried to go to college. And he said the first fellow student that asked him how he lost his arm, he said, Vietnam. And this student said, serves you right, and walked away. And
Wow.
I can hardly tell that story without crying. So he said that from that moment to the day we dedicated the memorial, he never told anyone else he had been in Vietnam. If someone asked him about his arm, he just said an accident. And so, every war has not just physical war wounds, but the moral wounds or the wounds of war. we've called it PTSD, we've called it shell shock, we've called it so many different names. But I think for Vietnam veterans, it was worse because they couldn't even tell the story that they were in the war. So it's bottled up and bottled up and bottled up. And so that memorial, I think, was incredibly important.
Yeah, agreed. I was really just a young man, even though I'm a child, essentially a child of the war. I had very little. It wasn't in the sort of the public atmosphere. There wasn't a lot to it other than what, like, kind of like what you're alluding to, Rabbi, is that people sort of just speak about it in sort of harsh terms or very dismissive terms, but speak more to the struggles of the veterans as they came home. Um, and then, certain things started to really come into the public for, I'm thinking of like Platoon, Oliver Stone, um, uh, O'Brien's book, the things they carried. But yeah, it was always held almost as a public, almost as a shame or a blight on American history. And so, yeah, your work in the now, like you said, it's one of the most visited monuments in DC. But thank you so much for your efforts
Thank you.
on that. And I will say, because many of my uncles fought in the war for on the side of South Vietnam. It's interesting how that same um, viewpoint has always been very strong, in at least within the Vietnamese community, the diaspora here in the States. That have always been very unbelievably thankful for the Americans that came and fought and tried to secure their freedom. Um, so it's interesting how that lens changes, based off of who was there and who wasn't, I guess.
Absolutely. And to me, the Vietnam Veterans Memorial is almost holy ground, a sacred space. People, as I say, when Jan Scruggs was fighting for it, they called it a wall of healing. That was their vision. I once wrote an op-ed for the paper. I called it a wall of healing prayer because so many people go there. It's a safe space. And even today, people put their forehead against the names. They hold up a baby to touch a name. You're not even sure what the relationship is, now to the people. And by the way, there are 16 chaplain names on the wall, 13 Army and 3 Navy. And whenever I speak to the chaplain school class, I tell them exactly what panel and what line the 3 Navy chaplains have their name, because I know chaplains go up and put their hand on the name and say a prayer, so it's an amazing memorial, and I'm very proud I had some part in it.
Yeah, yeah, as you should be. And what was that transition like for you, coming back? I mean, you'd mentioned, the challenges that Vietnam veterans had, but I mean, not only did you come back to the United States, but then you went into a religious institution and rabbinical school. That's a massive transition in any scale, but for you to be a veteran of an unpopular war at the time, then to enter into the into the academic side of the clergy, like, what all was going on in your life, and what was that transition like for you?
That's a very wise question, because again, a lot of people may not remember that was a time when a lot of Americans, to avoid the draft, went into seminaries, including rabbinical school, but also seminaries, which laid the foundation for the future leadership of the different churches and faiths to be even more anti-military. And when I went to rabbinical school in New York City, there were classmates of mine who later admitted to me that they had been, very active in protesting the war, and they were prepared to hate me. And it was only after they started to see me as an individual rather than just a stereotype of, people in Vietnam that their mind opened and they started to understand.
Mm.
And I remember my rabbinical school, Jewish Theological Seminary of America, is 122nd and Broadway, and right across the street there was Union Theological Seminary, a Protestant seminary, and they invited me to speak. And boy, that audience was so prepared to hate me. And I remember one of the questions one student asked. They said, "How can you say you're a person of faith, and in the military?" And I said sarcastically, I said, "You're right. We should only let people with no faith carry guns and put on uniforms and go fight." I said, we should be. I think the biggest mistake we made after Vietnam was there were protests that shut down ROTC and shut down opportunities, for a variety of people to go into the military. And, I used to tell the story when someone would come to me struggling in the military, a sailor or an officer. I'd say, in Jewish tradition, we look at a story in the Bible where Moses, when he was still in Egypt, saw Egyptian taskmasters beating an Israelite to death. And according to the Bible, he looks around and he sees no one else is going to help. So he jumps in, and fights the taskmaster. From that, there's a Jewish saying. We used to say, "Where there is no man, you be a man." Today, more poetically, I like to say, "Where there is no humanity, you be humanity."
Mm-hmm.
And I like to think that there were so many, of course, in any war, there are atrocities, there are shameful, actions. People explode. They just can't control their anger. But all it takes is one person in the right place, to make a difference, to add humanity and affect the whole squad, the whole unit, the whole ship. And I've seen that. So, my feeling is we should be encouraging the best people we know to serve.
Absolutely. Yeah. I
Well
love,
said.
I love the, I think it was Tim Keller, and granted this is within the Christian faith, but Tim Keller used to say that, places of worship are hospitals for sinners, not museums of saints. And so I can't think of a better place for the faithful to be. One of the things I refer to also when I speak to my Christian brothers and sisters in uniform is, Jesus, one of the first one of the miracles he did was to save a Roman centurion's servant. He never rebuked the centurion for being a centurion. And also, one of Peter's first conversions was also of a Roman legionnaire, and never told him, "Hey, in order to do this, you have to now, you have to put down the spear." And so I think that there is just a lot to be said for the faithful being in uniform, because, like you said, the opposite is way worse. No matter how bad you may
Absolutely.
think of it, it would be so much
Indeed.
worse the other
Yeah.
way around. Rabbi, I really appreciate your time, and I honestly could talk to you all day, and hopefully I'll get a chance to. But I guess sort of fast forwarding a little bit, um, 1983, you're out of rabbinical school. You're now is serving uniformed chaplain in the Navy, but you weren't assigned to the Marine Amphibious Unit. You kind of had an interesting inroads to your time in Beirut. Could you talk a little bit about what led you to be there at the time of the bombing?
Yes, I was part of an experiment. Back then, we thought in terms of Jewish, Catholic, Protestant, and those were the three kinds of chaplains we had. So the admiral in charge of the Sixth Fleet, the commander Sixth Fleet, three-star admiral, was on his flagship. The flagship is what we call the ship that hosts the admiral and his staff in Gaeta, Italy. Now, again, a lot of listeners when you say Sixth Fleet, you may think there's like a list of ships, but the Sixth Fleet is any ship in the Mediterranean. They become part of the Sixth Fleet when they go in. We call it in-shopping, and they become part of a different fleet when they leave. So back then it was a larger Navy. So we had about 40 ships at any given time in the Mediterranean. So the Navy tried an experiment that on the admiral's staff, they would have a rabbi, a priest, and a minister. And I was the rabbi, and our job was to circuit ride among all those 40 ships. And then when the multinational peacekeeping force went into Lebanon, and it was made up of us, the Americans, the British, the French, and the Italians, we had about 1,300 Americans as part of that peacekeeping force, mostly Marines, but there were also Army and Navy. So when they went in, because Navy chaplains support the Marines, I expanded the circuit riding. So I went ship to ship to Beirut, ship to ship to Beirut. And again, it's important to note that Navy chaplains cover the Navy, the Marines, and the Coast Guard. And we actually are the only officers, I think back then, that could wear different uniforms depending on our assignments. Now that we have a Space Force, the Air Force has adopted the same model that the Space Force doesn't have their own chaplains. Air Force chaplains cover the Space Force and can use that uniform. So anyway, for that reason, I had been to Beirut a number of times. The Marines in Beirut were part of what we used to call MAL, as both of you know very well, Marine Amphibious Unit. Now would be the MU, the Marine Expeditionary Unit. And they had two chaplains, a Catholic and Protestant. Catholic was George Pucciarelli, who later became the senior chaplain of the Marines, and Danny Wheeler, the Protestant. So I had been, just as part of regular circuit riding. But the reason I was there when the attack happened, October 23rd, 1983, was very special. The fifth individual killed before the giant attacks and explosions was a Jewish Marine, a staff sergeant, Alan Seufert from Nashua, New Hampshire. And in Judaism, we believe he was shot in the chest while he was in a Jeep examining the perimeter. And in Judaism, we believe in burial as quickly as possible, within 24 hours if possible, but otherwise as quickly. So he was killed in Beirut. So the Colonel Garrity, who was in charge of the Marines there, worked with the Commander 6th Fleet, and they worked with the governor of New Hampshire, got the body back very quickly. But, and this is one of my only in America stories, I love these stories. Who knows if there were anyone else Jewish in that American contingent, but out of respect to Seufert, they wanted to have a rabbi hold a memorial service for him, out of respect for him and his faith. So I was asked to come in from Italy, and it was very complicated to get to Beirut back then. The airport was closed. I remember from Gaeta, I went to Naples. Naples, I flew to Sigonella, Sicily, which was the center of naval air in the Mediterranean, got me to Cyprus, and then, zigzagging the helicopter, landed in Beirut. And by the time I got there, it was Friday, October 21st, 1983. So I led the service. I have a photo I'm very proud of. It shows that during that service, I asked the Protestant and Catholic chaplains to join me. We linked arms, and we recited the 23rd Psalm together. We somehow hoped we could be a symbol of unity in a country that was torn apart, where every religion was, gunning for every other religion. So Colonel Garrity said the next day, Saturday, they would get me started on my way back to Italy. At least I'd go as far as Cyprus. And I said, no, I don't travel on the Jewish Sabbath, Shabbat, unless there's a life in danger. I'm involved in helping to save that life. So I'll wait until Sunday. So it was just because I observed Shabbat, because of my faith, that I ended up being there the day of the attack. And I remember, so there were two buildings about 50 yards apart. Danny Wheeler, the Protestant chaplain, was in one, the building that was hit. George Pucciarelli was in the other. And when I was visit, I would alternate. I'd stay with Danny, I'd stay with Pooch, we called him. That time I actually was supposed to stay with Danny, but Pooch said he had something he wanted to talk to me about. Who knows what it was, but it may have saved my life because I stayed with him. And at 6:22 in the morning on Sunday, this van loaded with explosives under gas pressure rammed into the headquarters building where Danny was. And this massive 4-story building, was just reduced to rubble. I remember everyone who was there knows exactly where he was at that moment. I was in the head brushing my teeth. I had my T-shirt on, my trousers, and all of a sudden, the building I was in, the BLT building, shook. Windows exploded. The door came off the hinges. I threw myself to the ground. All of us were convinced that we had been hit by a mortar or shell or rocket. And as I crawled out, I saw everyone else was on the ground. And as we slowly stood, we were literally slapping each other on the back, thanking God we withstood whatever hit us. And then we started hearing these unearthly screams from the other building, and then screams of Marines who said, "Come help, come help." And we realized all we had felt was the shock blast. And, when the FBI did an investigation, they said that explosion was one of the largest non-nuclear explosions ever recorded. And again, the building was just reduced to rubble. And so Pooch, the Catholic chaplain, put a slim purple stole around his neck because he knew he was going to have to give last rites. And he just said, "Follow me." So I just followed him. And, there's an expression, I couldn't believe my eyes, which I had used before, but I never really understood before because I literally didn't believe my eyes. I couldn't see the building. The building had disappeared and there was dust in the air and smoke. And it took me a while to focus to realize that there was rubble, but all we could do was run from one wounded person to another. Some people had been blown out of the building. Others had been hit, by rubble, when the explosion, hit the building. And so there were so many people on the ground. And so I would just run one after the other until people. The other thing, and it's very important, and of course, as a Marine broadcast, this is crucially important. Some people say 241 Marines were killed that day. 241 American military personnel were killed that day. There were 220 Marines, 18 Navy, 3 Army. And then, of course, a few minutes later, the French barracks, it was hit by the same kind of suicide bomber, and 58 French military were killed. But the reason I want to emphasize the fact that there were 18 Navy, in addition to 3 Army, is that almost all of those 18 were our medical personnel. Just like the Navy gives chaplains for the Marines, so we give doctors and corpsmen as well. And so I think there was 1 doctor and something like 15 corpsmen who were killed. So not only did we have all these wounded and dying, we didn't have anyone with medical training to help. So I don't know how long it took before reinforcements came in, your helicopters from the ships off the shore, ambulances from the city, but it seemed like forever. So we were literally tearing our clothes apart to wipe blood, dirt, soot, from the faces and the bodies of the wounded. So I tore my T-shirt apart and I was using that. And when that was used up, I took the kippah, the skull cap, from my head, and I wiped people's faces with that, and it got bloody and dirty and lost somewhere. And at some point, after we had gotten all the wounded, and by the way, the final body, the final person to be dug up from under the rubble was the Protestant chaplain. He had been under for something like 5 to 6 hours. Danny Wheeler, he was the final person to be pulled up. Pooch and I were so convinced that he had died because so many people from that building died that we had already said that the next time we were in America, we would go together to visit his wife. And then it was Pooch who actually recognized in the rubble Danny's prayer shawl. And so the Marines started digging and they found him. It was a miracle that he was not only alive, but that physically, he was a perfect. Remember, he used to joke that when he remembered being pulled out, he still didn't know, the extent of what had happened, but he said, I almost counted his fingers and toes as if he were just, a newborn. So anyway, when we had a break, when we could catch our breaths, Pooch, had never seen me without my head covered. And so he tore a piece of his camouflage uniform off and he put it on my head. And he said, I want all these Marines, I want all these Americans here to remember that not only were we two chaplains, but we were chaplains of different religions. He still had the purple shawl on and now I had my head covered again, and so that we would always remember how different we were than that country torn apart by fighting. As a matter of fact, I wrote a report. Two days after the attack, a small White House contingent came to visit us, mourn with us, led by then Vice President George H.W. Bush. And he asked me to write a report and send it to the White House. And one of the things I said in that report was that it was important to remember that all over Beirut, there were Christian foxholes, the Christian phalangists. There were Muslim foxholes, but because of the Israeli forces, they weren't part of the multinational peacekeeping force, but they were in the area. There were Jewish foxholes, but I said we Americans had interfaith foxholes, and I said if the world had more interfaith foxholes, we'd have less need for foxholes and more room for faith. And that's the most important idea that I bring out of my experience there is that
is such a profound statement. That is unbelievable.
So well said. And I don't know how
I'm breathless right now.
I'm not sure how to follow up on that. That's what an incredible statement.
And that's why it hurts me right now. We're going through a time when the military new regulations are coming out. We're rescinding some of the regulations that allowed, just as one example, beards for religious reasons. Now we'll fight, and there'll be exceptions, but we're going backwards. At a time when I think that diversity was so important. As a matter of fact, I would say it's a coincidence, but I love the expression that a coincidence is just a time when God acts anonymously. There are really no complete coincidence. So at that time, before Congress, there was a bill, actually it was a religious apparel amendment to be attached to the appropriations bill to allow Jewish personnel to wear head coverings for religious reasons. And 2 years in a row, it had failed. The story of that camouflage kippah, which they started to call it, was read into the congressional record, both for the Senate and the House, and it passed. And the political leaders who were fighting for that said that they were convinced it passed for that reason. And one of the ideas I tried to promote as I was fighting, for the right of personnel, started with the skull cap, the kippah, but then it was the beards and was, turbans. There was so many more other reasons. Was that I think people would confuse unity and uniformity. Uniformity. I never thought a little kippah, skull cap like I wore was much different than someone with a bald head or someone with a mustache or someone with glasses. But the unity was that we were unified in believing in freedom of religion, and the idea that those of us who risked our lives for the freedoms we have, including freedom of religion, should be able to enjoy those freedoms.
Express that, yeah.
Yes, to the greatest extent possible in the military. So that passed. I'll tell you a funny story about the kippah, which I love to tell. When I first got in, before this amendment was passed, and that amendment, led to the military religious accommodation directive, which has grown and grown. And as I say, today is a little bit in danger, unfortunately, but I have faith. But I remember, when I was a younger officer in the military, it wasn't exactly absolutely prohibited to wear, a skull cap. Now, again, listeners have to understand that in Judaism, at least, the idea is to keep your head covered if you're religiously observant to a certain level. It doesn't matter with what. So I think some of the people against the change envision marching on the outside and everybody would have a cover, and then all of a sudden someone would be missing, his cover. Outside, as long as you have the military cover on, uniform, you're fine. It's inside when you go to the office or to your room, and you take that military cover off, that you put this tiny little skull cap on, and it's a reminder that something is above us, that God is above us all. So, as I say, when I was young, it varied, but when someone wanted to cover his head, it was always a struggle. I remember my first chaplain assignment was Yokosuka, Japan, and this young sailor came in. He said, "Rabbi, I'm not that religious, but I'm engaged to a woman who's more religious than I am, and she wants me to slowly but surely adopt some other traditions, and she would like me to start wearing, covering my head." So I said to him, "I have an idea. Trust me." And I opened famous words. Trust me.
Yeah,
So
it's like a military volunteer thing.
I opened the drawer of my desk, and I happened to have a collection of different kippot, what we used to call yarmulkes, from all over the world. So I took out this Moroccan one, which was multicolor, large. It was just beautiful. So I said to him, "When you go back to your ship and you take your uniform cover off, put this on." And he looked at me like I was crazy, insane. He said, "This is going to be 10 times worse." I said, again, those famous words, "Trust me." I said, "I'm not just a rabbi, I'm a chaplain. I know the military." So he went back, and evidently he followed my instructions, because I got a call from the captain of the ship, and the captain said, "Rabbi, is it possible for you to come down to my office on the ship? We have something to talk about." So I went right away. And I always remember what he said to me. He said, "Rabbi, I believe in religious freedom as much as anyone." He used an expression that wouldn't be PC today. He said, "As much as anyone in this man's Navy. But there's no way Seaman Schwartz is going to wear that beanie on my ship." So I looked at the captain, showed him the respect he deserved. And I said, "What if I could convince Schwartz," and I don't really know if his name was Schwartz, or whatever his name is, "if I could convince him just to wear a little black one like I do instead of that one?" He said, "Chaplain, if you do that, no problem." But, I always realize if the sailor had started with just a little black one, it would have been a different conversation. It would have been a problem. So you need to know the psychology of the military and look for a win-win situation.
That's
very,
awesome.
very clever. And I love the fact that you chose for your story to use the name Schwartz. That's my maiden name. So
Oh, very good.
Well, Chaplain, thank you so much for sharing your experiences and taking this time to be with us. One, I guess, thing as we close, and you've provided a lot thus far, and I'm just so appreciative of your candor. What are some of the things looking back now you know, 42 years since the bombing. In what ways has, you know, in a very similar fashion to what you'd mentioned with, you know, between you and Pooch, but what has, what have you been able to take away from this unbelievably traumatic experience? And how did it shape your career, your faith, your, you know, the way that you interacted with both, you know, military and civilian religious people? Like, just can you tell a little bit about, and then just some of your insights into what's going on now, and similarities, differences?
Well, I had a varied career. I was proud every place I was. As a matter of fact, some of my closest friends are still my friends from naval intelligence. My final assignment before I went to rabbinical school was in Rota, Spain. I was with Naval Security Group, which is part of naval intelligence. We would ride submarines and eavesdrop, and we were such a close-knit community. We couldn't tell a lot of other people what we were doing, and so one of them, when I ended up being a chaplain, he said, "You've traded in your top secret for top sacred." So,
Nice.
so I always like that. And, I like to think that a chaplain, you don't have, you don't become a more faithful person because you're ordained. You just have more responsibilities to reach out and help others. And I thank God I had the friendship and experience with Chaplain Wessling, all the way back in Vietnam, changed my life. But along the way, other people, other events have changed my life. And I'm so proud of the people with whom I've served at every level. And when I speak, I'm very proud of the fact that I still speak to the classes at the Navy Chaplain School. The Army, the Navy, the Air Force each have a separate chaplaincy and a separate chaplain school. Navy's is in Newport, Rhode Island, and I tell them that when we talk about pluralism and diversity, it's not an academic concept to me. It's part of being a human being. And not only the fact that I wouldn't be a rabbi if it hadn't been for a Christian chaplain, but wherever I was stationed, I was always the only Jewish chaplain. So when I had personal hard times, when my brother died, when my father died, it wasn't a rabbi who comforted me. It was a chaplain of another faith. Back in the early days, before we had Muslims and Buddhists and Hindus as chaplains, it was just, again, the rabbi, priest, and minister. And it was the others who comforted me, and so, this idea of working together, it's part of an American dream that I hope we don't forget. And I think, again, that idea, difference between unity and uniformity, and being proud that we can look at our military, whether it's an interfaith foxhole or in the Air Force, I used to talk about an interfaith cockpit, on the plane. There's a strength in diversity, and I think it's a little bit under attack right now. And to me, diversity is when I'm sitting in a meeting and there's a problem we're discussing, and someone raises an idea that I wouldn't have thought of in a million years, because all of us are the product in part of the community in which we were raised, the faith, in which we were raised. Some people, the fraternity or sorority, some people, the football field. And sometimes it takes someone who was raised with a different vision of the world to think of an idea, and that idea can change the way all of us think. I also think that we should never give up on the idea that we can change the world, that, the Vietnam Veterans Memorial, as I said before, changed the way we looked at the relationship between war and war fighters. I remember in college, the biggest change I ever experienced was when, Mothers Against Drunk Drivers came up with this idea, friends don't let friends drive drunk. I was in a fraternity in college. I'm ashamed to admit it, but I remember fraternity brothers getting in their cars and driving away, and we would just pray they didn't get in an accident, but we never thought of taking their keys away. So it changed our approach to how we treat people, who are endangering themselves. And again, I carry that to the military, and sometimes I say shipmates don't let shipmates not just drive drunk, but shipmates don't let shipmates break the rules, break the laws. We're responsible for each other. So, I have a lot of lessons. I'm still learning, I think, still struggling, but very, very proud, that I was in the military and that I'm an American.
Wow, what a way to kind of close things out. That was very inspiring.
Yeah. This whole
Wise,
conversation has just been so uplifting, so fulfilling. I can't believe it.
yeah, wise words, Rabbi. Very wise words.
Yeah.
Well, Rabbi, thank you again so much for spending time with us, sharing your experiences, invaluable time for me this morning. And so thank you again. For our listeners, please check out the October 2025 Leatherneck, which has a full article written by friend of the show, Adam Walker, that talks about the chaplains that were present there in Beirut. For Rabbi Resnicoff, please go to Resnicoff, which is RESNICOFF.net, and learn all about this amazing American. Rabbi, thank you again so much for being with us.
Thank you both for inviting me.
Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you both.
And maybe we can have you back on the show sometime.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so much more I want to talk to you about.
It would be my honor.
Awesome.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful.
The Marine Corps requires leaders of all ranks to have a deep understanding of war and the employment of force. MCDP 1 reminds Marines that the military profession is a thinking profession. Every Marine is expected to be a student of the art and science of war. It goes on to say that every Marine has an individual responsibility to study the profession of arms. Self-directed study in the art and science of war is at least equal in importance to maintaining physical condition and should receive at least equal time. The Marine Corps Association understands the critical importance of ensuring that Marines are as mentally ready for combat as they are physically ready. That is why we offer an entire page dedicated to wargaming on our website. We have recommendations for both tabletop board games as well as computer games. And for Marine Corps Association members, there is a discount code for War Game Design Studios that you can find on the website. War games are a great way to immerse yourself in history and to put yourself in the shoes of the great leaders of history. Go beyond guided instruction and experience the thrill of wargaming. Check us out at mca-marines.org/decision-making-exercises/wargaming-2. That's mca-marines.org/decision-making-exercises/wargaming-2. Take your training to the next level. Scuttlebutt is a production of the Marine Corps Association. You have heard the voices or contributions from Major Vic Rubel, USMC retired, Nancy Litchman, William Truding, and our guest. Ty Frazier is the editor, sound engineer, and technical producer. The Marine Corps Association is not an agency of the U.S. government. The opinions expressed in this episode are the personal views of the participants and do not reflect the official position of the United States Marine Corps, the Department of Defense, or the Marine Corps Association.